Thank you very much.
That way invited to make it look.
Yes, yes. There are complaints. I just seen complaints on social media. We needed to hear some people.
I also wondered how all the men colluded just to come on board.
It's good, and you've just come at the right time when you're looking at this main headlines. One of the headlines that many people are discussing today is a trip by Raila Odinga. He's heading to the UK. He's scheduled to give a lecture at Chatham House with regard to the electoral process in Kenya and in Africa in general. The headline on page 9 with regard to this, page 9 of the Standard reads, Raila likely to opt out of repeat election with planned visit to UK. Opposition presidential candidate Raila Odinga's planned visit to the UK and lack of interest in campaigns about 2 weeks to the fresh presidential election appears to indicate he may not participate in the poll after all. Yes? In the same story, Orange Democratic Movement Director of Elections Junaid Mohammed said participating in the elections would only serve to legitimize Uhuru's possible win. Mr. Mohammed also said the opposition would, from next week, hold rallies to tell their supporters not to engage in the fresh presidential election. Pamela Riambo, let's start with you. Is it done? Is it done? Has a decision finally been made? NASA is not taking part in the fresh presidential election. This is a talk. Raila is heading out of the country. Is it done?
Well, thank you very much. To start with, I think discussing Raila's visit, it has been explained he's going for a conference, and it's right that he should travel and give the conference.
15 days to the election,
yes.
He's on the ballot.
But he's not going to die there. He's coming back. He's not going to stay there forever. So I don't think it should be such a big issue, because NASA and Raila Odinga and all the principals of NASA have stated clearly that there are some changes which I think the whole country expects. And from the very day one, they said without these changes it would be difficult to participate in this forthcoming election. So it is important that we have to see these changes. When we are going to a playfield which seems like the result is almost definite, then
and what you're saying has been captured on this headline, same page 9 of the Standard, a different headline, why we are not campaigning, say NASA chiefs. And we have a photo there of ODM MPs, Antonio Luoch, Jared Okello, Joshua Koyo. The opposition leaders claim the outcome of the October 26 poll has already been determined and have vowed not to take part, exactly as you said. As a political strategy, Bonasimeka, do you think this is the right decision?
First of all, put in context the first headline you read about Raila likely not to, what is it again?
Likely to opt out of the repeat election.
Yes, yes. I just want to put that in context, because that came from Murkomen actually on one of your shows. It came from Murkomen, who is a Jubilee senator. So it's him, it's Jubilee profiling, you know, Raila in that manner. But he has not at all talked about opting out of an election. He has never talked about failing to participate in an election. He talks about an election not being there. Those two things are different. But the media insists on framing it like a boycott. It's not a boycott. It's about whether we will have an election, what you can call an election, or not. And you guys better take this seriously.
And that's a possibility. What possibility, or how are we going about having no election? Because we do understand the IEBC has already set the date. They've already gone ahead and printed ballot papers on who Raila's name and his image must be on the ballot paper by now. It is 15 days to the election. Surely, how are we not going to have an election?
Maybe in your preamble, what you've missed out is that probably they have already decided who has won and who hasn't won. Let me tell you, politics, there are two levels of politics you need to understand. What is referred to as the constitutive side of politics and the distributive side of politics. Distributive side of politics is the lower level, which seems to excite most people who want to get into elective politics, because it's about who will get what. And when those who hoped to get something fail to get it, they throw tantrums and make those moves that we've been discussing, but those know that those are not tectonic movements. As I said, they're just opportunistic. What is in NASA we are most concerned about is the constitutive side. If you do not change the foundation of the architecture to be what the country, at least through our constitution, decided it should be, If there are things happening in the country, there are other maneuvers happening in the country to undermine that constitutive architecture of our politics, you will never get anywhere with the distributive side, because those then who have managed to capture the foundation of the constitutive side of politics dictate what will happen. They determine election results. They determine outcomes of elections way in advance. The beautiful thing that we have in this country...
And where does Raila Odinga fall on the constitutive
right
side?
now, why he's puzzling even the media is because of his focus on the constitutive side. He's not saying that let us also do all we can to take this presidency.
Okay.
He's saying let us do all we can to realize the spirit of our constitution.
Okay.
And in this case, it's the issue of electoral justice. Let us make sure that when we have an election, it's a credible election, so that whoever wins this election is a true leader decided by the people of Kenya, but not by a few people manipulating system, the constitutive side of politics. Before
I even get the input of these other two gentlemen, I asked you a question. How are we not going to have an election on October 26th? Because we're saying it's 2 weeks to the date. We can see the process continuing every single day. We still do not have an indication of how this election will not happen.
However difficult it is for you, I'm inviting you to contemplate that is a possibility, and that will happen, that can happen. It has happened in many other countries where one side that has captured the state and as I said, the constitutive architecture tries to push and realizes that sometimes too late, that the opposition to that, which is carrying the aspirations of people, is much more powerful than they thought. Okay. Look, you just need to look at the confidence with which NASA is saying, let us do the right thing in this country, and then we all move
and we're trying to understand that confidence.
The how part of it, I think, has been explained even in the Constitution. This is a Republic of Kenya, and our Constitution bases or founds the elections on constituencies. And so Section 38 elaborates a lot about this, of our law, that says that we can't have elections in some sections of the country or some constituencies and other constituencies don't. And I think NASA has pronounced it clear, and even one of the captions you just read there, they are saying if things go on the way they are going, all is to be done is to tell our people or the electorates whom we know are members of Raila team to...
So there will be no election in parts of this
and that nullifies everything.
Dr. Samkama, what do you say to that?
Fred, maybe two things first. The first one, earlier, is to revisit the statement in the Standard that Raila is likely to opt out of the race later this week. I think part of it is not just from comment, but interviews with some people within ODM, like Junet Mohammed, who indicated actually that this issue will become clearer in the week. Like, we're expecting a statement confirming that he's likely to opt out of the race. So that just didn't come from comment. But I want to revisit this issue of NASA keeps saying that there will be no election without specifying how exactly they can ensure, and you can tell every time that question comes up, they never quite explain how, because I've always said it is possible to peacefully boycott an election. It is possible to do that, but it is not possible to stop an election without resorting to some extra-legal means, or what I would call without resorting to violence or other ways. Now, even in terms of talking about the constituencies, it is possible, of course, to ask their supporters to boycott going to the polls, but you cannot stop IEBC from doing its constitutionally given mandate to organize elections. So if IEBC sets up shop in all these constituencies and the supporters refuse to come to participate, and I still have to say that even in all the constituencies across the country, even those in NASA strongholds, there are still some Jubilee voters, however few. So if these ones participate, it would serve in a sense to legitimize the electoral process. What we don't know is whether, in terms of a significant side of Kenya not participating in elections, what it says about legitimacy of the whole process and acceptance in the eyes of both local and international partners. But I have to say this, in terms of the demands that NASA has raised, some of them quite clear and very consistent from the word go. And we've always said that some of them are definitely achievable, and NASA has the right as important stakeholders within, in the electoral or in the contest, the political contest. The important stakeholders, they have the right to make these demands and expectations, and it is important for their demands to be addressed. But some of these demands are not achievable within the time frame. Some of them you can even consider them unreasonable, and some of them you can actually call them obstacles. You are putting this as a demand, but it's actually an obstacle to make sure that since it cannot be met, then you say we will not have an election. It looks like, in a sense, and every move by NASA, it looks like either they are not keen on us having elections on 26th of October, or maybe because of what we discussed earlier, that sense or perception that is being created of the inevitability of a jubilee, which is what they are saying, that it looks like it has already been determined. They believe maybe it is by IBC, but from a jubilee point of view, maybe they believe it's because we have put measures in place to ensure that we are able to increase our support from what was nullified earlier to maybe a bigger margin. And I think that is part of the sending the mixed signals to their supporters. It's not very clear even to any NASA supporter, will there be an election on 26th and are we participating? I think that has remained.
Just looking at your colleagues even in Parliament from the other side, and the ones being quoted here, they're not even keen on campaigning. We're not seeing them out campaigning at all. Meanwhile, President Uhuru Kenyatta is always traversing the country. Today he's in Mombasa. He's on a 3-day tour in Mombasa. Last week he was elsewhere. Are you clear on this issue that they keep saying that there could be no election come October 26th?
Thank you, Fred. First and foremost, allow me to look at what he says, that Raila is likely to opt out of repeat election by visiting UK. My take is Raila is a very, very strong politician. He knows what to do and at what time. Many a times he has used foreign trips to ignite political temperatures in his favor. I'm seeing a likely situation whereby upon his comeback he has built a good landing position, whereby he's now going to ignite the country to his level, which he has now taken below for now. He has been silent for the last maybe 2 weeks. When he comes back after the UK trip and he has made a very good arrangement, he is likely to get us in Jubilee on flat foot, and then he ignites his tempo. So it's not true to say that maybe he has gone out of the politics. So he's not somebody you can now say written him off. No. On the other side, why maybe they are not campaigning, I don't know, because so many of his the so-called the principals and any other team, they are not moving. But you can see now the statement from, when you read the paper through, you'll see the statement from now the deputy party leader for Kakamega, Honorable Paranya, now also coming up and talking in the same direction. So I see a situation whereby should we not encourage the NASA people to participate in this election? Could be true they want to opt out of the election, just using the obstacles they've put against us and say they don't want to see the election on 26th August. Putting into perspective of two things. One, this is not the first election. This being a fresh election, it's a constitutional election ruled by the Supreme Court. We are within the 60 days within which we must have an election. Failure to not to have an election within 60 days, it has dire consequences in terms of who is going to be the president after 60 days. When are we going to have the next election after 60 days? And look at the ruling of Justice Maraga. He said, should a similar situation come before me, I will make same ruling. What does that mean? Should we now go as per what my colleague, the Honorable for Migori County says, if the situation goes before Maraga after 26th and nothing has been put in place, we are again going to be put into turmoil. So my take to this situation is this: let the Honorable Raila Odinga see that this is our country. He is part of this country. Let him shape and help us to move forward as a country, not to move as a divided country.
And probably now the headlines coming from that is this one, page 8 of the Standard. I will not talk to Raila, says President. Yes. Another one here on the Daily Nation, page 6. Uhuru Raila trade words over coalition claims repeat election. Now, this narrative of a Nusu Mkate or a crisis appeared in the last because it was there immediately after the Supreme Court ruling. Everyone was talking about a crisis, but it appeared to die down. For the last 2-3 weeks, no one was talking about the possibility or even talks or anything like that. But now it is back. The president himself talking about this thing. Raila, of course, he denies. And let me just quote the president. They clashed yesterday. Yesterday, President Kenyatta said he outmaneuvered Mr. Odinga, whom he claimed expected him to reject the Supreme Court ruling by agreeing to go back to the electorate. He says, and I quote, "We read his thoughts when they were still in the envelope. I was smart and we knew his plans, and we said even if we do not accept the decision of the court, we will respect it and go back to seek votes from the people." But Odinga says that is very cheap propaganda. We are not interested in a Nusu Mkate government. We don't want to be begging Uhuru or Ruto daily. Moreover, our chemistry cannot rhyme. Now we're back to discussing the possibility of, or rather lack of, such talks. Surely it means that's probably where we're headed. We don't just talk about things that we do not think they could be real.
There are people who propagate that kind of narrative, but nothing could be further from the truth with regards to NASA's strategy, and that has been clear and consistent throughout, even before the 8th August election, that is not any of the things that NASA leadership contemplates getting into some kind of coalition government, was still with the Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. That could happen with the Mwai Kibaki. That could even happen with the Toroti Sharaf Moi, but certainly not with Jubilee leadership. And it goes to what I've kept trying to tell you, that it's beyond, what is at stake is beyond the presidency. It's a fight for the soul of this country. It's a fight for the soul of Kenya. And when you see the people who are right now, who are in charge of, who have captured the state and are using it for the interest they are using it, I shudder to imagine that you can be yoked with those kind of people. It's impossible. It cannot happen. It's not anywhere near Raila Odinga's thoughts that he can even imagine being in government, with the Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto and their team.
It gets even more interesting. On the Daily Nation, presidential election candidates yesterday clashed over what President Kenyatta said was Mr. Odinga's earlier plan to precipitate chaos so that foreign powers could step in and force a grand coalition government. Now, with 17 days to the fresh election, and this is the Daily Nation, says the Daily Nation has also seen a contingency plan prepared by Western powers before the August 8 election to prevent a 2007 type meltdown. Now the plan was to use the friends of senior politicians to exert pressure against their friends and allies to force a compromise.
Let me just finish this before you move away from me. Let me, pardon me for this, Mheshimiwa, and the rest of the panel. Let me say this without any fear of contradiction, very, very authoritatively. It is those Western backers, these junior officers in Kenya, the ambassadors, a few of them, who are actually putting pressure on NASA leaders to agree to that kind of a Nusu Mkate arrangement. And they've been rebuffed many times. It is the bobs of this world who are being sent by Jubilee to come and try and tempt NASA leaders. And they've been told categorically, no. We are not interested.
So you say Jubilee is using diplomats and head of missions to actually get
they have tried so many times and they've been categorically told no.
Okay.
Let me remind the nation as I sit here before you that I've been saying something that is ailing Kenya: unrighteousness. And when I talk about this, before I come to the Nusu Mkate thing, colleague, with all the due respect, it baffles me. In fact, it is irritating to hear that somebody is saying there is no time to make any changes, unreasonable obstacles. It is these things that NASA helped to identify in Kenya that actually made us get into this state. And so when NASA is talking of changing these things, and then somebody says they are unreasonable obstacles and no time. This thing was said the very first day when Maraga said that we are nullifying the elections and have to be repeated in the next 60 days. So from that very day one, what stopped initiating these changes? Until now we have, as days move by, so there is this, there's no time. Time is money. As a manager, strategic manager for that matter, I know even a minute can do a lot. So we are not going to listen to this narrative and excuses. I call them vijisababu. They are not even worth mentioning. Now, coming to the issue of campaigns, NASA was way ahead. Raila was way ahead of Uhuru Kenyatta. 1.4 million votes, true votes. And let me tell you, Fred, Kenyans have decided. Even those small movements, it is, in fact, when you look at these State House movements, majority of them for now are looking for money. Not really that they are principled and feeling like Jubilee is on the right path, we have to move on with them. That one may be discussed another day, but that is what we saw. A delegation from Kisii, they came, allegedly they were given 3,000 each. They weren't complaining, and in the bus they were flashing the money and saying NASA, you know, those kind of things. What does it show you about what some of our leaders are purporting to do? Uhuru should wake up and stop being cheated by people. Now, the case of the nusu mkate thing, it is true, NASA has not been interested in the nusu mkate. And the delegations have been sent. Let Jubilee not think and then they want to put their thought as it is the NASA thought. And you see why Raila is still right to say, I will not participate in this skirmish election again. If Uhuru Kenyatta, and most of the time, the leaders from Jubilee, there have been such insults, you know, instead of, yeah, let's campaign, let's go, there's such hostility. And we are saying it is not the issue of precedent. In fact, if only Kenyans would do the right thing everywhere in this nation, it doesn't matter, Fred, hata kama wewe, you are the one who will sit on that seat as a president, there will be peace and satisfaction in this entire nation. Okay. And that is what Raila stands for, and all of us.
Dr. Sam Kamau, when we hear none other than the president saying something like this, not just his lieutenants, it's now the president himself, Uhuru Kenyatta, speaking about even the remotest possibility, because if at all it was so irrelevant, because he dismisses it, I don't think it would form part of his campaign. It's not something he would even mention. But when we hear it's President Uhuru Kenyatta and his opposite number, Raila Odinga, talking about that, whether dismissing it, there must be some truth to it.
Well, Fred, I think maybe it is important to help contextualize this so that you can tell, you can understand where NASA is coming from and where the president is coming from. We have seen reports repeatedly of, statements from foreign envoys and other voices. Some of them are local and international NGOs, some of them are the religious groups, pushing for what you'd call talks. And from my point of view, when I look at it, and I've said, and I want to interpret the president's statements in that context, NASA has a list of grievances against IEBC. And there are things they have written and expressed that list of grievances. And these grievances are not tripartite. They do not involve Jubilee. It is basically an engagement between NASA and IEBC in terms of discussing that. On the other hand, Jubilee, of course, is pushing through some amendments, and I believe it's part of what we'll be discussing later. And when you listen to the voices now coming from the envoys, and personally I actually have disdain for some of these envoys in terms of their meddling with our internal affairs as a country, because they are the ones, and you remember even the idea of a coalition government in 2007, they are the ones who actually came and we should have a government of national unity. And we know that the envoys represent the interests of their country. So when they are trying to pronounce themselves on internal affairs of the country, maybe it's because they can say we are not organized enough, we are not able to put our house in order. But when you put the proposed amendments by Jubilee on one side and then weigh them now against what you're calling NASA's reducible minimum, that is what informs now the call for talks. But as far as I'm concerned, I think what IBC should do, number one, is respond to NASA in terms of the demands that they have made, and I think they have attempted to do that in the past, in terms of you have made this list of 9 demands. number 1, 2, 3, and 4, you know, these ones are achievable, and we have actually they demonstrate the steps they have taken to address some of those, and they have done part of that. And say those ones that are not achievable, why are they not achievable? And to mitigate in terms of the concerns that you have, this is what you are likely to do. Now, when it comes back to the idea of nusu mkate, you have to understand that both sides have actually mentioned this. At times, I think, as the Supreme Court ruling, if you listened to Orengo, and also other people associated with NASA, they started talking of, that after the 60 days period expires, who will cease being president, and therefore will need to form a transitional government that can then, a caretaker government, transitional government that can then organize elections. So it's a talk that actually, I wouldn't say emanated from them, but they have actually also been suggesting that and saying. And the other thing is, in terms of strategy, a well thought out of strategy, when NASA says there will be no elections on 26th of October, what is the game plan? So what happens after that? What is it? Because they're saying it's not about the president, and you have to agree, in terms of who is the president, that is definitely important in terms of even achieving the things we are talking about. So I agree that we need certain changes and certain measures put in place responding to the issues that the Supreme Court raised in its ruling that caused the election to be nullified. But if some of these things are addressed, I want to believe there has to be a meeting of minds where people meet somewhere and agree that actually this country needs to move forward, and one of the is, of course, is resolving issues around elections. So then Sumkate, even if Simeka, but he said he's not a spokesperson for NASA, running away from it, NASA has actually mentioned in terms of a transitional government, a caretaker government that can then organize elections in the future. The last thing I wanted to say is, in terms of the demos, and you see, saying now, I think Norman Magaya suggested that now there will be 3 times a week. The idea, of course, is to heighten political temperatures, almost creating a sense of we are in a crisis of some kind, and therefore now you continue hearing louder voices from the foreign envoys and the religious community saying, actually, people need to come together and talk for the sake of moving the country forward. It is important because because the country is divided, as we have always said, there has to be a meeting of mind, a softening of positions, so that we can come together. And I don't want to believe that we are so incompatible, we are so divided that it is actually impossible, because in the past we have found solutions when things have been so dark, and there has been a meeting of mind, a softening of positions, and people have worked together in the past.
There are talks before the elections with regard to ensuring that the electoral process can go on October 26th, but we are running out of time. It's 17 days to the election. According to what we can see from the headlines, NASA, it looks like they've already given up. This election is not happening. We don't even care about the talks. So even if we have the talks, it means therefore it will be after October 26th.
Thank you, Fred. During NASA campaigns towards the August 8th election, they said they are 10 million plus. Doing the numbers, even if you give them the 1.4, my sister Honorable is saying, it does not add up to 10 million. What they got and what now they are purporting to have gotten. This is a scenario with which they look at an imminent defeat ahead. Since there is an imminent defeat ahead, they look at it and say, the only way now they can use these opportunities to hold the election. There is no election. Move into past the 60 days. Remember, the 60 days is both in the Constitution and in the CJ's ruling.
Yes.
Therefore, we cannot do without the 60 days. After the 60 days, they'll want now to go the way the president is saying. They must now bring the president on the table, now discuss for the Nusumukate business. I don't see any other shortcut they want to imply now that they see the end is a bit not working for them. Yes.
Okay. Did Jubilee shoot itself in the foot by pushing these laws in Parliament, just making it harder for NASA to accept to be part of the process? Do you think that probably if they had not gone that way, probably the elections would have gone ahead?
What Jubilee got wrong, and still insists on getting wrong, and I've just had Sam here talk about it, is the wrong characterization of those demands by NASA. Those minimum, irreducible minimums, and they're basically about reforming the electoral architecture. They are not in competition with whoever else ideas. It is not NASA versus IEBC. In fact, NASA is not in competition with IEBC. IEBC is a public body, but public institution, which NASA is insisting that needs to go through those kinds of reforms as the minimums, not even everything. Those are the minimums. So by Jubilee coming up with those suggestions to change laws in the manner that they've said, and hoping that this will now be in competition, that as contra, as to attack, to bring it at the same level as NASA's irreducible minimums, they just got it completely wrong, and it ends up achieving a different outcome, because those demands don't change, those irreducible minimums don't change, even the characterization does not change. So it's best to understand the purpose of those minimum reforms. It is not in competition with Jubilee, neither is it in competition with IEBC. It is to reform the electoral process, period. Other things we can compete on, yes, we ought to. In a political environment, you compete on ideas and so on. Those are there, and their day will come. But for what needs to happen for us to have a credibly elected president, NASA's position does not change and does not come. Jubilee could have its position, and maybe that is what they've put on the table, although we don't think that is reforming anything. That is actually, those are what I would call obstacles in my opinion. It is not about competing with Jubilee, what they've put on the table. And then finally, on that point, a caretaker government, or if you like, a transitional government, can never be the same thing as an Sumkate government. In fact, the people who are competing to be president, the good practices demand that they must not be part of that. It must be some other neutral, completely neutral persons who manage this transition and deliver, if it's an election, and in this case an election, a presidential election, deliver the country through this election. It can never be those who are competing coming in and saying that now they can purport to manage a transitional government or a caretaker government. So it's good to get those two things very clearly. If and this is a critical juncture for us in this country. If things don't go the way they are contemplated in the Constitution and in our laws, we will have, as a nation, as Sam says, we've refused so far. A section of the nation has refused. But should it happen that way, we will be forced, not by foreigners, and I hope not that it will not be foreigners, circumstances, to come together and speak to each other honestly as Kenyans. What really are we doing? What are we achieving with these kind of positions we take? Are we achieving progress for the nation?
And it appears we're already positioning ourselves for such a discussion. 17 days to the October 26th presidential rerun.
You see, Fred, it's very interesting. Just to add on what he's saying, it is very sad that when we are thinking about the concept of talking together and remaining one as Kenya, Jubilee is just looking at it in terms of President Uhuru and Raila. Let me imagine that the 6 million voters who are declared by IBC are the genuine ones that voted for Raila. That is not an insignificant number that you can just dismiss and say, when the president is saying they cannot talk with Raila, what is he saying? He cannot talk with the 6 million people. So what kind of Kenya are we being told we are going to have? I think there are some utterances that are just not worth the position and the integrity of the office that somebody holds. And let me say, without minting my words, the truth is the majority of Kenyans are sick of the Jubilee operations and governance. And so, my friend, the fact that you are imagining that NASA is seeing an imminent defeat, that is out of context completely. So talking, we must talk with or without these lapses in agreement. Kenyans, all of us are saying we must remain a united nation that we call Kenya. And in a democracy, and that's why it is very interesting that in Kenya, courtesy of these struggles of this man we are now making look like a demon in Kenya, Right Honorable Raila Odinga, we now have laws and constitution that even protect the rights of just one person, the minority. So dismissing a whole 6 million voters like that is insignificant. We can have our cake and move on. I think what we are saying as NASA, whatever it will take, like I keep saying, some people when I talk like this say I talk prophetically, and you know many people do not believe. I know God is tired with the sickness in Kenya. And all these things, people will not be surprised. I mean, I don't know whether they will be surprised or happy. But God is insisting on restoring the Kenya that we had a few years ago. Not this one where other people, so long as they have tea in their cup, it doesn't matter whether somebody out there is suffering or not suffering. That is what we are pushing for.
Meanwhile, the grandstanding continues. Of course, Jubilee MPs this week, after conducting public hearings with regard to those electoral amendments to the electoral laws, this week they're presenting that report from the public hearings to Parliament, both houses of Parliament. That headline is on page 11 of the Standard House Team to Table report on laws despite opposition. The Standard has been very fair and actually roughed how this thing works: first reading, second reading, third reading, up to the point where it's assented to and the Act of Parliament becomes law. And this could happen in the next 1 week or so. And just because of this, NASA said they're not going to be part of that election. This process continues nonetheless. On the same page, anti-IEBC demos to continue. Today is Monday. Now, as Dr. Sam Kamau mentioned, Norman Magaya from the NASA Secretariat, is the National Chief Executive of NASA, has said now the protests will be held 3 times every week, starting from today. So, in a letter to Nairobi Police Boss Jafet Koome, Mr. Magaya said the marches would take place every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So, an extra day. So, today, Wednesday, and Friday. Now, this is the grandstanding we have. 17 days to this repeat presidential poll. As you make your final submissions, because our time is up, what exactly do we expect to happen, Dr. Sam Kamau?
Fred, of course, one of the things I would want to say, I am an optimist and I always have a lot of faith and hope in this country, in our ability to pull out of crises that we manufacture on our own, ably. It is less than ideal that we have this hardening of positions that is manifesting in terms of demos 3 times a week, because it would create the impression that the country is in a serious crisis. On the other hand, I've always said that it would have been quite ideal if the push for reforms, both the minimum reforms in terms of the changes you want to see within IEBC, and also in terms of the changes in law, because both NASA and Jubilee were, let me use the word, hurt. NASA complains loudly against IEBC, Jubilee complains loudly against the ruling of the Supreme Court. And I think it would have been important to look through the issues and see that these are the issues of concern. Even if we are in competition, we can actually find middle ground in terms of these are the issues we want to address. So I was saying this should have been a bipartisan push to make sure that the whole country comes together, because if it is only one side that is pushing for the demos and then another side also appears to be pushing for these amendments, of course the end result is that we'll not have we'll entrench divisions further. But going forward, like I said, I know Jubilee might still go ahead and push through the amendments, and remember, I know we have condemned the amendments wholesale, but there are specific provisions that maybe we would have taken time to isolate and see whether they are reasonable or not. But there's something hidden within, not hidden because it is out there within the amendments, that shows or that creates a situation where if one candidate was to withdraw, then the remaining candidates should go ahead and be declared the winner. And I think it's also part of why you have seen positions hardened, especially from the NASA side, where last weekend, the other weekend, that is, Raila said drop the amendment and then we can talk. I still believe there will be a meeting. I'm very hopeful that there will be a meeting of minds in terms of position softening
before October 26th?
Yes, before October 26th, because we must get a solution. So this could also be part of grandstanding, like you are saying, hardening positions so that you up your negotiating power and say that now you are responsible for creating this political crisis. Could we talk, call off the demos, and on this other side, could we request the president maybe not to assent to, the bill? I think it's part of the negotiation process, but it would be very ideal when we have elections on October 26th, so that Kenyans can speak with their voice and express their preference so that the country can move forward. I have refused to contemplate a situation where we do not have election. That is why I said demands are okay, but we can agree these are the minimums we can agree on. that are achievable within the remaining period.
Allow me to skip you first so that we can balance the political views and go to Bwana Simeha. Make your file submissions with regard to this grandstanding that we now see and the possible way forward.
My final view on this is, first of all, not to keep insisting that we will get into a crisis or we are in a crisis. The country has been, for me, in a crisis since 2013, early 2013. We have been in a crisis, and it has been manifested in very many ways, and that is what it cannot change because of focusing on an individual becoming the president. We as a country must have the kind of radical dialogue that we need to have, if we choose to do so, so that the country can fundamentally change. The foundation of our governance can change for the better, not of two individuals, but for the better of all Kenyans out there. Ask the people who never have food, ask the people whose loved ones have been shot and killed by police. I could go on and on, and I don't need to go into that, but the country has been in a crisis with this kind of leadership. Look at how much we've lost through corruption and looting and so on of our economy. Look at the way we are undermining devolution. Look at right now governors, whole governors, saying they're unable to run their counties because someone, and a few individuals at the center, are making a decision when to open and close taps, contrary to the constitution and our laws. So we have been and still are in a crisis. So it will not happen on 26th. Is not going to be any momentous day. It will not be a defining moment for the country. The defining moment is the process that we can choose to engage in if we want as a nation. That look, things have gone terribly wrong, out of hand of those who thought they can control. Because, and thank God, I keep saying on these shows, thank God for whistleblowers. It's incredible, and I really thank God for that. Right within Jubilee, within highest levels of government, who are able to bring out this information on what is being planned and where the country is being taken. There are millions of people in this nation who are prepared to resist that at all costs, so that together, as Kenyans, we put aside our stupid petty differences and talk and put the country back on the reform track.
Okay.
Thank you, Fred. Kenya is bigger than two parties, Honorable Raila Odinga and the President, Honorable Uhuru. And why I say so, that's why Honorable Uhuru is on the campaign trail. That's why Honorable Raila, he should also be on the campaign trail, because it is us the people, not them, that rule Kenya. It is us the people to decide who becomes the president. Therefore, my take is let both parties, if it means engaging for the common good of going to the people to vote on 26th of August, whether through the process or the procedure or whatever ways, as long as let the people vote on 26th of this month. We do not want a scenario whereby somebody is imposed on the people as a leader. We don't want. And that's why the president is saying he's not willing to discuss with Raila, or the Honorable Raila, to discuss, meaning a boardroom decision, and then they move to the people and say, we have agreed this. Let them discuss or talk and agree that on 26th, let both parties, Honorable Raila and Honorable Uhuru, go to the people looking for votes, and let Wanjiku and Atieno decide in the booth on that day. So my take is let them engage towards the 26th day, so that we see a Kenya that is able to vote, a Kenya that's able to decide, and we move on for the next 5 years.
And finally, Pamela Odhiambo.
Oh, thank you very much, Fred. I am a Christian, born again, and I believe so much. So let me put the nation to the context where Kenya is. Those who believe, read Jeremiah 7. The whole of it, and you'll understand where we are as a nation. I'm calling for a change of attitude, a change of mind, a change of soul, so that we care about everybody else in this nation. So it is important for Kenyans to know that we are at a very poor state, where we are shedding innocent blood, we are grabbing from the poor, and God is not amused at all. So judgment is here with us. For that reason, let the voters know the amendments that are ongoing are unconstitutional, and it is not going to bring any good to this nation. So let nobody cheat us. Last but not least, let all Kenyans who love truth, righteousness and peace remain united and come out in large numbers to cry for a free, fair and credible elections in Kenya, where the votes of those Atinos and Wanjikus and Kamaus and Pamelas can count for what they really mean. We do not want a situation where one person sits down and decides on a computer that it is Fred and Pamela will never be, even if the people say so. Okay. Thank you very much. God bless Kenya. Thank you so much, Pamela Odhiambo, Woman Representative Migori County, Emmanuel Wangwe, MP Navakolo, Joseph Timeka, political strategist, and Dr. Sam Kamau, our analyst, helping us look at the headlines this morning. Pub Breakfast still continues. Remember, it's Inspirational Monday. Dr. Wale will be in studio discussing vision. What exactly is that? You have to wait and watch. Also, that's a very good interview, a very important interview for sports lovers and Kenyans in general with regard to those candidates, IAAF Athlete of the Year candidates. They will be in studio here, Helen Obiri and Manangoi. That's also something very interesting to watch. Willis Waburu and Joy Mudengi will be conducting those interviews. Remember, Carlos Kibu